Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of the task force of the Early Music Platform, I'd like to welcome you to our second Quodlibet of the season. This forum is the AEC's online and open forum for dialogue on anything having to do with early music and historically informed performance. Everyone is welcome in the early music community and interested non-members as well. I wonder if it makes sense to do a quick round and to see who is here from what schools or what situations already, or if we should just jump in. What do you guys think? Shall we wait a bit, Claire?
No, I think we could do that. So it lets time for others to come in. And maybe I have a question to you, Sarah. When people are here and they're not in the database, or maybe it's interesting to know how you got the information, and if you want to receive it, to put your email address in the chat. Is that a good idea, Sarah?
Yes, please. Put your email address in the chat or write me to the email address I'm putting you in the chat now.
Thank you. That's great. All right, well then let's do a quick round. I'm going to leave the rest for those of us in the task force till the end, and our guests I'll introduce afterwards as well. I think I see Elisabeth. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Elisabeth Scholl. I'm a soprano, Baroque singer, and currently professor at Mainz University. And we have a very small singers department, but also Baroque singing and a very wonderful program called Baroque Vocal Academy. Next year, we're going to have Paul Goodwin and Florian Hayarek and a lot of other things. So we offer a lot of Baroque programs, although we officially are not a Baroque institution.
Thank you very much and welcome. Nicole Schwind, where are you from?
Hello, my name is Nicole Schwind. I used to be musicologist at the early music department of the Musikhochschule Trossingen, but now I'm emeritus.
Fantastic, welcome. And Hubert.
Yes, hello, my name is Hubert Eiholzer. I am from Lugano, from the Conservatorio della Svizzera Italiana. I do not deal with early music, but for years I've been interested in developing outreach programs. We now do mainly programs in the domain of applied music, music and health. So we play music in nursing homes. But we plan to extend these programs. They're quite successful, and I'm here because I'm very interested in how to use stories in order to, let's say, enhance the appreciation and understanding of the music that you're going to play. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tabea, welcome. Are you already stationary?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Hello, my name is Tabea Schwarz. I'm a recorder player and I also play early bowed instruments. I'm currently teaching solmization at the Schola and pedagogy, like Fachdidaktik Blockflöte in Zurich and in Cologne.
Thank you very much. Well traveled. And Teresa?
Hello, I'm Teresa Piech. I am Baroque violin player, and I'm teaching Baroque violin at the Academy of Music in Krakow, Poland.
Thank you very much. Welcome. We have so much enjoyed our last visit there with Rema, by the way. And Ola, if Ola is there. If not, we will move on and go to Lucy.
Sorry, actually, my name is Irena Trupova, and this is the account of my daughter. I'm sorry, I with the connection, so I won't appear.
That's fine.
So I'm soprano. I'm from Janacek Academy in Brno. in Czech Republic. I'm teaching singing, so I'm a vocal coach in the department for early music. So
Fantastic.
the first time, yeah, and then I'm very enjoying it.
Great. Lira?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
I'm Lira Castrati. I'm from Kosovo. I have studied music composition and music theory in Switzerland at Haute École de Musique de Genève, and I'm currently teaching counterpoint in Kosovo and analysis of musical form. So I'm new here. I'm interested to see, to hear the discussions of today.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Filena? It might be that I'm not sure. I'll just say several people here have their cameras off. So I'll just do a quick round. Filena? Or Inés?
Hi everyone, sorry that I can't join with the camera. I'm Inés Davena, I'm a recorder player and I teach at the Royal Conservatoire in The Hague.
Thank you very much. Ludovica? You're muted still. Maybe you can unmute, but we see you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm from Italy and I'm studying Baroque violin at the Musikhochschule in Trossingen.
Lovely. Welcome. Radka?
Hello, my name is Radka Katarina. I am from Czech Republic, studied in Den Haag, Traverso, and currently I am teaching in Bratislava Church Conservatorium, early music, also some related subjects like theory, and sometimes I'm also guest teacher in Brno Janáček Academy.
Very nice. You're very welcome. Susanne van der Helm? Perhaps not. Doch.
Hello, my name is Susanne van der Helm. I'm a recorder player and a singer of early music. I studied in the Hague Conservatorium for Recorder with Ricardo Kanji. And later I studied early vocal music with Rebecca Stewart in Tilburg Conservatorium. And now I live in Bratislava. Sometimes I coach someone, but my very active musical career is a bit dormant at the moment. And yeah, but I stay interested.
You're very welcome.
I cooperate now lately with Radka because we found each other in Bratislava.
That's super. Very good. As we go forward, I see some people who I know, and I'd just like you to be very brief so that we can start the discussion. But Aurore, I'd like you to say a couple of words.
Hi, I'm Aurore, I'm French, and I'm studying at the Schola Cantorum in Basel, and I'm a singer.
That's lovely. Thanks, Aurore. Annelies?
Hi, I am Annelies. I also study at the Schola and I'm also a singer.
That's great. And Asako?
I also study at the Schola and I finished my study in The Hague.
So you connect everyone here. Very good. And I think I also see Monica, who may be online.
Hi, actually it's not Monica, it's Mladen. I'm using my wife's laptop. So actually, unfortunately, it was not my intention, but it's her account. I can show my face.
Okay,
Hi.
sure.
So I'm a pianist and I'm also on a PhD at musicology. And well, my focus will probably be modern music, but I'm very interested in old music as well. So that's the reason why I joined. And one of our colleagues from musicology actually gave us, Ivan Churkovic, he was not able to be present, but he shared to all our colleagues this information about this Zoom meeting. So I'm here and joining you.
Thank you so much.
you.
I'm glad that you're all here. This shows not only what an international public that we've got and participant group, but also how wide our range of experience is and our main interest. We're instrumentalists and vocalists, medieval and later. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion. So I'll jump in now and give a brief introduction. Today's forum is called The Singer of Tales, music as storytelling from the Middle Ages to the present. And as musicians, we are all storytellers in our own ways, whether as singers or instrumentalists. We're all trying to connect and communicate with our audiences. It doesn't matter what repertoire, whether this is very early or very late. But especially in music of the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, we have to try extra hard to connect the audiences with the music that is so far from the experience common to most of us today. How do we experience ourselves as storytellers, and how do we teach the art of communication? These are two questions that I think are vital to our discussion today. What role do orality and unwritten transmission play in our music learning and music making? To help us start this discussion, we have two guests who are specialists in the field of medieval music, orality, and storytelling. And I'd like to introduce them briefly. Marc Lewon is a musician and musicologist, specializing in music of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. As a lutenist, he performs internationally with ensembles across the spectrum, and he's also the director of the fabulous ensemble Leonis. He teaches plectrum lute and medieval theory and ensemble at the Schola Cantorum Basiliensis, and has also taken part in numerous research projects, including Musikleben des Spätmittelalters in the Region Österreich at the University of Vienna with Reinhard Strom and Birgit Lodes. He serves on the board of the successful concert series Re Renaissance in Basel. And our second guest is Katarina Livljanić, a singer and musicologist specializing in medieval music. She's the director of the innovative ensemble Diálogos, where her research allows audiences to explore our musical roots and their inherent oral and written traditions. She's also professor of medieval voice and ensemble at the Schola in Basel. She's traveled the world as a performer and teacher, for instance, at Harvard, the Sorbonne, and Utrecht. A second field of interest is the music of the 19th and 20th centuries, which offers us a bridge out of the Middle Ages for today. For her work, she's been honored by the President of Croatia and the French government with the title Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres. My name is Kelly Landerkin. I'm a colleague of theirs at the Schola and the current chairperson of that institute. I'm a singer and teacher of medieval music and member of the AEC's task force. I'm joined this evening by my colleagues in the task force, Isaac Alonso de Molina from The Hague, Anton Steck from Trossingen, and Claire Michon from Poitiers. I see that various people have entered the room, and I greet you all very warmly. I'd just like to, before we jump in with the discussion, just give you an idea of what's happening. We're going to have a couple of opening statements from, start the discussion with Marc and Katarina, and then we'll open quite quickly to a group discussion. So in order to, just so you've got an idea of how people get into this strange field that we're in, I'd like to ask Marc, first of all, what was your path to becoming a musician at all?
Okay, I guess it was a bit of the traditional beginning with recorder and xylophone and all that. My mother was very interested in bringing musical education to us children, but I'm coming from an otherwise entirely unmusical family. I'm the only one doing music in the family, really, professionally in any case. And yeah, so at some point I then started playing the guitar. I was interested in the guitar and got some lessons for a while. That died out at some point. At some point I picked up the piano and the violin and a bit of organ as well, and so accordion also on top of that. So tried all sorts of things, and then I got really interested in medieval history, and with that came my interest in medieval music or early music. I wanted to figure out how that works. Back then you couldn't Google it, of course, so I needed to find people who would tell me more about it. And I like putting it this way, that I took the scenic route towards medieval music. So I didn't go straight to the Schola Cantorum to study that. I didn't even know you could do it there. I got in touch with people who play on medieval markets. So I picked up an instrument. Someone told me you should play the lute. So I picked up a lute, and went on the medieval markets and started studying musicology and German first, with a specialization in medieval studies to figure out how does it work? How does the language work? I was interested in the early German language. I was interested in Middle High German, Old High German, early New High German, all those High Germans. And at the same time tried by studying musicology to figure out where are the sources, what does it sound like, how does it work. Did my master's degree in Heidelberg, and then finally I got in touch with the Schola, and I knew I could study there, and everything else is history. For me, that was then my Hogwarts when I went there. That was all of a sudden it all made sense to me. Yeah, and I've been there ever since.
Thank you. That's so interesting. You Hogwarts. That's really funny. In fact, I think I met you before you were even associated with the Schola at all, at one of these concerts where our ensembles just crossed paths. So that was very nice. I wonder if, I think we'll get back to this a bit later, but your studies in German, in linguistic, might have also been a path into the aspect of storytelling that we'll be talking about a bit later. Katarina, I'm also curious what drew you to medieval music and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, my story is maybe strange or maybe not. I really got involved or interested in early music at a very early age. I had a chance to live in a city on the Dalmatian coast in Croatia, and I see there are a couple of my compatriots here tonight, so it's nice to see that they are also around and nearby. I had a chance to grow up in a very beautiful medieval and Roman even city on the coast of Dalmatia, Zadar, and in that city there is still a very interesting 9th century church of Saint Donatus. In that church, in 1960, before I was born, started a festival which was a festival which profiled itself in the 70s and 80s as an early music festival. So I actually could discover early music when I was like 5 or 6 years old. My mother took me to concerts, but I'm also from not only non-musical, but really like no musical ears family. So I was always ashamed of my parents when they would sing in birthdays or something. So nobody's musician in the family. And I discovered early music in an extremely, as you can imagine, intuitive way. No knowledge, no intellectual prerequisites or anything. And I have a kind of very distinct memory of the English ensemble Pro Canzone Antiqua performing the play of Daniel in my hometown. I must have been 7 years old. And it was such a powerful experience that I couldn't sleep the whole night. My mother came in the morning, woke me up to go to school, and then I said, I really know what I want to do now. I want to dedicate my professional path to medieval music. And my mother just said, please go to school and stop these idiotic stories that you are telling. But here am I now. I could tell you all the missing episodes in my life, but maybe they are not so important. That one is still, I think, the determinant one. And I think I still have that sometimes not very intellectual approach, even if I ended up doing studies of musicology, moved to Paris, did a PhD in musicology, studied always singing along. And but I think on some level that childhood memory is still very present for me.
Well, actually, it almost takes us straight into the middle of the topic, because your first impressions of early music, or of music of this kind at all, are oral. I mean, you heard, you didn't learn in a lesson, you were listening to people performing. And I think that's a different way to internalize music.
Yes, there was that festival. Then next to my home, there was a Benedictine monastery where nuns were singing, and still are, all the office and mass in Latin. Then there is also on the coast this tradition, oral tradition of glagolitic chant, which is really orally transmitted liturgical music. And that was also a part of this tissue in which I grew up. So yeah, definitely, oral transmission was the determinant one.
Thank you. What do you understand under the term storytelling, actually? I realized as I was preparing this topic for tonight that I had an idea of what it was. And then I started to Google. And I realized that there's more than one definition, and that they often contradict each other. So I'm curious, first to our speakers, what do you imagine as being incorporated under this term? And then I'll open it up to the participants as well.
Marc, do you want to?
Do go ahead, Katarina. You're in a flow.
Difficult question.
You know what? I didn't Google, so I'm going to be very innocent in answering. Storytelling. Another thing, and then I will definitely stop talking about my childhood because it's boring. When I was a child, I actually was very involved in theater, and there was a teacher who asked who could imitate voices, and I didn't even know I could do that. And I ended up putting together a show which I was giving in, now don't laugh, in like full basketball stadiums in my city where there were 5,000 people, and I was 7 or 8 years old. And I had this like a stand-up child comedian show where I was imitating different voices of actors, singers, and everything. And in that early age, I was confronted with a question, how do I do that? And again, I didn't know how to do it, but it all had to fall into one story. So storytelling, I would say, it has to be compelling, entertaining, and it has to also help people to remember. The story is there also to remain, to provide some frame and some information, and to tell something that we want to be remembered. And storytelling, anything that involves communication from one person to the other. I think in the end, we are telling stories all day long, all the time, as we meet people, as we talk with them on the phone, anything.
Yes, good, quick response. Marc?
Okay, I'll start with an anecdote. So thing is, I'm on tours a lot, and my wife usually doesn't come along. And I tend to tell her what had happened, what the place looked like, you know, kind of telling her stories of what I'd experienced somewhere else. And then a year later, it happens that when I show her pictures, she thinks that she was there. And apparently the storytelling is so intense that she builds that into her memory. And then I try to figure out how that could be. And usually what I'm doing is I have what I'm telling about is like a film in the head. So I see it as a picture. And then I'm telling what I'm seeing, basically. And transferring that to musical performance, I think I feel that when it grabs the audience most is when in front of your inner eyes, the story is happening while you're telling it. To me, storytelling is that, you know, an image or a film that you have inside your head and you perform that. You read it off your memory in that way rather than remembering the words. Just memorizing. I mean, it's like an image that I'm describing. Yeah.
This is getting to the heart of maybe two different ways to remember stories or to present stories. One is the abstract overview of what the story is, and the other is the memorized verse form almost of it. So I'm curious, because when I did Google, my response, the things that I Googled were much less interesting and much less creative than what the two of you just said. But I've come up with a definition. But first, before I present that, I'd like to open up the room to other impressions. What do you expect to anybody in our space now? When you hear the word storytelling or you go to a storytelling evening, what do you expect? I've been told I need to stay silent for 15 seconds in order to pick up responses, but I don't like to be silent quite that long. Does anybody have anything to add before I give my dictionary?
Well, I could.
Anton.
Yes. Mark, that was great. Thank you, Catherine and Mark. That was great start. Well, the only thing when I prepared for that, I also did not Google because I didn't think that there was anything usable. But I look from another. I mean, we have two. I mean, what I learned in my early ages was the Harnoncourt. What Harnoncourt writes about how you should look at music and how you should look. So to also put it in a story, to what you have to tell them, and what I read then in the sources of 18th century, especially in Mattheson, when he describes how to if you play an overture, for instance, and the following movements of an overture, you go into a castle, and the first thing the door opens, and then you have to you're thrilled by the either the paintings or the staircase or whatever you're thrilled of. I mean, any castle is from 18th century is normally nice, and so then he leads you through a castle sort of and gets in different rooms, and that's a story which you or this kind of thing what you see during your visit. I mean, Linde Brunmeyer's office. So this is the best here. That's why. And so so he describes it quite closely to a really actual story, and this story what something you had you realized during your life, and then you put that into a musical story. I thought this is the description, but maybe you will tell me something else from Google.
No, I'm actually interested in that point because I mean, there's a visual aspect to it, there's a visceral aspect to it, and not necessarily because, okay, I will get to the definition a bit. One of the definition of the National Storytelling Network of the United States makes a couple of points, and one of them is that storytelling uses words. And I find Googling not always very helpful, but often it helps me to figure out what it is I think about something. And I disagree with this point. I think that you can tell a story without words. And so otherwise, I could dismiss all of you instrumentalists right now. But how does it feel actually to tell a story without words? Does it, I mean, there can be a slightly, we could say it cheapens this the music by making it programmatic, and or it enriches it with something additional that may not have been there before. I'm not an instrumentalist, so I don't know how it feels actually.
It really depends, I believe. Oh, sorry, and Elisabeth.
I just wanted to say that we singers, we have the easier part when we tell stories, because we do have the words, but in case you understand them in the audience. But it is for an instrumentalist and a singer in a way the same. We have to thrill people. We have to be able to touch them. And you can do that. I mean, there is so much more than words in language. You have body language, you have mimic and everything. And I think I am usually thrilled by people who are able to tell stories with their instruments. That is so fascinating. But it means that that's maybe a next step, that we also, as teachers, we have to teach the students how to transport all these things, emotions and mimic and action and everything. And so storytelling, you asked, your initial question was, what do we expect from storytelling? I basically, when I go to a concert, whatever kind of concert, I want to be thrilled. I want to be taken in. And that is a big part of a musician's job, and for us to teach them.
This is the next step, isn't it? I mean, you've learned the music and then something about the next level of transporting it. And before I know Marc wanted to say something, but, and I'm not going to harp on this definition, but I do think this is really interesting. They came up with 5 points of a storyteller. They said storytelling is interactive. And this I find is absolutely essential. They said that, in fact, it's not only that there's no barrier between the performer and the listener or the audience, but that the response of the listener actually molds how the performer performs. And this is something that I was thinking about when I was trying to imagine how we can teach storytelling. It's being awake to that aspect of waiting for the reaction and seeing, how do I go on now? So that's one way I could say it. The second, I've already said I disagree with. Storytelling uses words. I don't think this is true. Also in textless music, not just instrumental. Storytelling uses actions such as vocalization, physical movement, and gesture, as you were saying, Elisabeth. It presents a story. We could get into the question of what is a story, but maybe that's going a bit too far back. And the fifth I really enjoy is the storytelling encourages the active imagination of the listeners. And they make the point in this network that in this way, it is in opposition to theater, which acts everything out for you, which shows you and doesn't just tell you. So I wonder, where we are as musicians. Marc and Elisabeth?
Okay. Regarding the interaction with the audience, I think what we are currently doing is a good example for a certain distance with the narrator and their audience, because when you're in a Zoom meeting, it's sometimes we can see some reactions, but we don't hear them. We don't feel reactions. I feel that when I'm in the classroom, it's much easier. You do something maybe intended as a joke, and some students laugh or smile, and you're encouraged, to go on in that direction or to do something with it. And I felt in the Zoom world that we've experienced in the past few years, that feedback is of course lacking. So it's sometimes hard to tell. Am I going somewhere where I'm keeping my audience? Am I interesting them? Or maybe do I keep doubling back to points because I do not get that affirmative reaction that makes me go on, that makes me feel, oh, my point came across, I can move on. Maybe I'm dwelling too much on a point because I can't see that reaction and I feel like I didn't quite get through yet, until I rationalize that in the Zoom world that they can't, I can't feel that. I just have to trust my feeling that I can move on now. So I think that that taught me a lot about this interaction, and I do very much agree. You need that interaction with the audience. You need the feedback. I felt that so strongly when I went to the Globe in London, where the audience is almost in between the actors, and the actors are reacting to the audience who's moving around on the floor there. And I found that so captivating and immersive, really. And I learned something from that as well. Yeah, so sorry, that was just about the point of interaction with the audience.
Thank you so much. Yes. Elisabeth and then Katarina.
Yes, what you said, Kelly, was very interesting. You said theater tells everything. I don't think that it necessarily has to, but unfortunately, when we talk about opera, we do have a lot of transpositions into today, yeah, and then an opera which has so many dimensions and layers, and the story is just one part of the whole thing. And then there comes, and I agree with Marc, the reactions and also the fantasy of ourselves. I mean, when you have Handel's Julius Caesar, and then there are so many things you can think about it. So the story is not just this one layer that is being presented. Unfortunately, today's mise en scène, lack poetry and lack to give us the freedom to interpret. They want to show us directly. But this, on the other hand, brings me to the second question, a second point. This day, the stage directors, they seem to have the feeling that they need to tell us the story. And that is and so the instrumentalists are very lucky because they don't have this, they still can choose. And often singers are obliged to do what a stage director does. But when it comes to reactions, which you mentioned, then there is a new problem which I find, and it's not only depending on Zoom meetings, but I discovered, I've been teaching now for some 13 years, and I find that it's getting more and more difficult to get reactions out of students. They look at me like sitting in front of a screen, and I try. It happened to me exactly what Marc told. I explain again because I have the impression I'm not arriving at the point, and then do it a second and third time. So when we tell a story and we don't get the proper reaction, then indeed, we don't know whether we have reached the audience. But on the other hand, the audience, these days, we have to teach the audience to react again, because a lot of young people are not able to show mimical reactions. And so this is another a little piece of puzzle in the matter of storytelling. If we want to have reactions, we have to teach young people also to show reactions. And the last point is that there's a big difference, or we all, storytelling needs our fantasy. And that is so important. I mean, when you see the Harry Potter movies, I like the books much more because they leave so much room for my fantasy. And in this respect, you instrumentalists are luckier than we singers.
I think I take on your point about, actually, it's not just that in a different time now that we've learned that maybe we have forgotten some social skills that have allowed to show emotion, but that it's actually also, if an audience comes to an event, they have a responsibility, don't they, to be to somehow take part. And I wonder if we've started maybe a bit too much passivity because of this online forum, which is allowing us to come together today and to speak. But I find myself, interestingly, doing exactly the opposite of what you just said, and over exaggerating my reaction so that people can see that I'm saying yes. So I think it can go in both directions. And thank you for the point about fantasy and imagination. That's definitely one of the most important aspects. But Katarina, you've been waiting.
No, it's very interesting. And as I hear what Marc says, what you say, Kelly, what Elizabeth says, then I think, yeah, now everything changes of what I wanted to say. But I mean, I think what we are all pointing here is that maybe we are already in a second stage of passivity, because the first stage of passivity was when we started performing theatrical forms or storytelling in front of an audience who is paying a ticket to come and sit quietly and listen to it. Even if they are in the same room with us, they are much more passive than they would have been in a liturgy, in a procession, which provided a frame, a common cultural reference frame, which then didn't mean that these people were observers, they were participants, or what Marc said about the Globe Theatre, or what we could say in my ex-country, there was this very strong tradition of epic singers, like well, I'm very happy that there is a colleague from Kosovo here, but there is still in Croatia and Bosnia and Serbia, the epic singers are still extremely active, and I work even with some of them. So they have a community, that traditional society, which actually almost already knows parts of the story. So storytelling is not what we now have in theatrical situation when everything has to be told. The frame of reference was there. So imagination was much easier to trigger because there was more of a community. And I wanted to say another thing, which an actor told me many years ago, a British actor, who said, when you play on stage, you should always imagine 3 persons in the audience among the others. One of them is blind, one of them is deaf, and one of them doesn't understand the language in which you are performing. And if you make those 3 happy, then you have succeeded. And it has been with me since many decades. And when we were talking about textless storytelling, and Elizabeth, you mentioned we have the privilege, singers, of having the text. But sometimes we perform in languages that the audience doesn't speak. So in that situation, we are almost like a textless situation. And I will finish just with an anecdote that came to me, which I've heard also as a child, and which really moved me very much. The Russian poet Yesenin went to a Georgian village and recited some of his poetry. And there was a peasant there, a Georgian peasant, who came, and at the end, he was in tears. And somebody wanted to ask, why was he so moved? What moved him in this recitation? And it turned out that this peasant didn't know Russian. And when they tried to establish the communication, what was so obvious is that it was not the words, but that transcendental quality that goes through the words when it is there. And many times it's not there. And I would even say that successful storytelling is that, transmit the message in spite of all the difficulties in the communication channel.
This was actually, I'll get to Anton in a second. This was actually going to be one of my next points is do we have to translate ancient songs in foreign languages? Or can they be transmitted? Can they be understood on a subliminal level, even if we don't understand the text? I mean, it might be that we get different shades. Yeah, I think I might take your point. Anton?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is extremely interesting. And also what Marc says about the Globe Theatre. Maybe we should start to knock down the distance to the audience. As often as possible, and talk to festivals to make just a new setup and put their chairs under in a different setup, the chairs in a different way. I don't know. That would be, but because the distance takes very often away the distance to the audience between the artists and the audience takes a lot of times the possibility to interact. So it's more difficult. But one little thing I wanted to say about storytelling, it was very funny. So I think the story should stay your personal secret. And what the other one, that's what Goethe actually says. Goethe says, it's important that you do the right thing. If the right thing happens to the other, is none of your business. That means you have to be sure that you, I liked also the blind and the deaf and the other with the other language. That also goes together with that. You have to be sure you transfer the right things, what you think is right. You never can know what the others think. And one little nice story was in my string quartet in the very early times. We played a passage wonderfully, and it was so amazing. Every time this passage came, so these measures came, we were so convinced that we do the right thing. And at some point I asked, what do you think in this? And I told my story. And the cellist says, oh gosh, I have a totally different opinion. And the viola player said, oh my God. So this place was destroyed forever. So we never got to that point. So don't tell your stories. You have to have a good one, but don't tell it to the others. Keep it as a secret.
That's a fantastic point. You're right. It's it remains your personal story. I wonder if there is any reaction from the students we have in the space now to any of this. You've been called upon a bit to, or mentioned, especially in the sense of this passivity with Zoom and emotion and reaction. I'm curious if any of the students feel like, yeah, that speaks to me, or no, that's definitely not my experience. Yeah, and perhaps does the digital realm help in storytelling because it requires us to jump over yet another fence? Was this Aurore trying to speak? Not yet? In that case, how about if I turn it around and ask, for those of you, I mean, actually all music teachers are also teachers of storytelling. So how do you teach it? And the provocative question is it a gift that you just have this ability, or can you learn it? Elisabeth? And then Katarina?
Well, I think it's both in a way. I think it is important that on the one hand, you teach the technical skills that enable people, the students, to convey emotion, their own fantasies and everything. That is important on the technical level. But then, I mean, text or the words, that there's so much more to it. What I do practically here is that I have that I give a lesson which is called musical breakfast, and we talk about. I bring the cakes for and the students something to drink, and then we have breakfast indeed together, and we talk about poems. About interpretation, about old language. I mean, it's not only that the medieval language is so far away from us, but even Mozart, even Brahms, Schubert texts, whatever. It's not our current language. It's not what they call, yeah. It's not it's no contemporary language. And so we try to translate it. I make them translate these words written by poets, which are outdated, not from themselves, with words and meanings they maybe have no idea what they mean, into their own words. And that is quite, it's funny what's coming out, and it's very, it teaches me something. And so we try to find our way to the content of the thing. And then the next thing is that the students have to decide what they want to say with what they have learned, or with the piece. There's a composer also who has made an interpretation. There's the pianist, or the harp, or the lutist, or whoever who is accompanying us, who is also giving some sort of input. And yeah, you have to be able to go out and tell all this. And yeah, there's this technical level, there's the level of knowledge, and then there's the acting. And I have to admit that one of my favorite, or my favorite actor, whom unfortunately I've never met the chance to meet, is Kenneth Branagh. Because what he's doing with Shakespeare, that is what I try to teach my students, that it sounds like this. And then when all these texts sound as if they're coming from your heart and from your imagination, and then you can do something with it, and then you will be able to arise the fantasy of the audience.
That's a fantastic point. I wonder, Katarina, I know that you wanted to speak. I'm also wondering if this connects a bit to your work with the mythology class and the Bible classes that you offer here.
Yes, I just wanted to say also, even before, when we were talking about the passivity, I think it's also unfortunately caused, or should I say unfortunately, I don't know, by the fact that in early music, if we want to focus more on early music, we are often very, very obsessive, almost, I would say, with the logistics of the music, like the notation, the codicology, everything. But then when it comes to what does this mean? What is this story about? Sometimes there is a huge silence in the room. Therefore, I offer in the Schola this class of classical mythology and Bible. And this is, I think, in a historically informed performance practice, as important as knowing about the treatises, notation, and everything, because this is what in the end will be the sense of what we are saying, which story are we telling. And what I wanted to add, because Elizabeth said already so many great things that I don't need to add more, but I would add one more quality that I remember having noticed once in a teacher that I was listening to. And at some point he said, in front of a relatively small group of students, he said, he stopped in the middle of talking about medieval liturgy, so very kind of complex topics. He stopped and he said, I think I lost you. It was so great because you could feel that there was a huge empathy there. And I would say that is more or less of a gift that a teacher would have. Or if it's something that he or she doesn't think about so much, I think that's one of those very important things in transmission of any story to students or to the audience, empathy. This kind of antenna to feel, are they bored? And I think as performers, we do have that antenna. We could feel when there is a moment when we should change something, even change a motion or speed or whatever, or make a moment of silence when we are losing them. And I think it's very important to be attentive to that.
I think this gets back to that point from earlier about this connection between the audience and the performer, and how it's interactive, and how the audience, I mean, your teacher in that moment is a performer, and the class is an audience, and he stops his performance so that because he realizes he's lost his audience. So what do? You check in with them. And I wonder. Elizabeth said it's both things. It's it's a gift and anyone can learn it. But I think it is also a skill that you have to train, unleashing your imagination and saying the same words in 1,000 different ways, or transporting the same idea in 1,000 different words. So the more that you can do this, and of course there are rules of rhetoric that we can then start to follow if we want to do it in a more structured manner. But the whole idea of being able to teach imagination and transport that, I think, is maybe something that I could also work on. Isaac.
Yeah, wonderful things on the table, and many things. I'm making an effort to try to remember as many of these things, of these ideas as possible. Just going back to what you were saying now, and maybe connecting with what Katarina was saying. Yeah, there's the whole thing of the skill, but there is a part, maybe it was empathy or it's something else. This moment in which you realize, and it's this sort of thing that is probably the gift, that you can look at people and say they are not understanding, and that is maybe the little bit of, or maybe you can see two people talking to each other, and this happens to me many times, that two people are talking to each other and I say they are not understanding each other, even if they look like they are understanding each other. So that moment of that's the thing that then technically, or let's say skillfully, you have ways to go beyond that, or you have trained because you have many. But one thing that is very nice of this conversation, it's also that we're thinking a little bit, as because we are in an educational institutions, that we want to teach these sort of things, but at the same time that these things are the things that are used to teach. Yeah, these very skills. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, you've summed that up very well. And maybe that brings me back to why I chose the title of this. And I'm just gonna throw it out and ask, has anybody read the book by Albert Lord, The Singer of Tales? Because this was revolutionary for me. It was a required book by in my introduction to medieval music with Thomas Binkley in the first year of my master's degree. And he just said, you won't understand medieval music until you've read this book. And then you can go on and then you can dispute it. But I'll just give you two little statements from the book that shows maybe why I thought it was relevant for this discussion. He says in his preface, the singer of tales is at once the tradition and an individual creator. His manner of composition differs from that used by a writer, in that the oral poet makes no conscious effort to break the traditional phrases and incidents. He is forced by the rapidity of composition in performance to use these traditional elements. So we're dealing with a different medium here. It's not a piece of music, a piece of repertoire, but that agency, that narrative agency in a prose discipline, perhaps. And so he goes on and says, our singer of tales is a composer of tales. Singer, performer, composer, and poet are one under different aspects, but at the same time. It's sometimes difficult for us to realize that the man who was sitting before us singing an epic song is not a mere carrier of the tradition, but a creative artist making the tradition. And this ties in a bit to what Katarina was saying. And of course, Albert Lord was an ethnomusicologist who was specifically he and his partner Perry went around the Balkans especially and did thousands of recordings of musicians who are singing epic tales. And he posits that this could go back in an unbroken tradition 2,000 years, back to Horace and Homer and Ovid, which I find quite interesting. He then breaks down, what are these aspects? I guess my question then after, because I did find this extremely inspirational, this moment of realizing there's a difference between the fixity of music as I had understood it and the fluidity of music as he was explaining it. And so I wonder what can we learn when approaching repertoire from the experiences of this bardic tradition that Lord is explaining? Because what does it all mean unless you can transport it into Corelli Opus 5, if that's your thing? Katarina.
Yeah, I had also the possibility to work with some of these epic singers. And we did some years ago a program called Heretical Angels about beliefs and rituals in medieval Bosnia. And we had with us one very young boy who was then even underage when he started working with us. And then now he's a grown-up man. He learned from his grandfather, and it was very interesting. Usually it skips a generation. You don't learn from your father, you learn from your grandfather or your grandmother, because at the moment when you are in a learning process, they are freer. They are doing less physical work in these traditional societies. They are older, and so they spend more time with children. And so he learned from his grandfather and played with this gusle and sang. What I always felt, what I could learn from him, for instance, is then 5 minutes after him on stage singing a medieval song from the same country where he's coming from. That was very powerful. I would feel hugely humble in front of him, because I felt that whatever he does it every time anew. He's never performing something that he has learned, even if that is really the case, because it's the same text and the accompaniment is more or less very reduced vocabulary. But there is something in this immediacy where a change would be possible if he wanted. And it would really come smoothly, because we are in a situation of creation. And that's what I try to do. And that's what I try also to transmit to students. How can we make this music sound as if we were now creating it? And changes are possible.
This is an important point, and it even gets into technique, because we can never actually repeat something. It's every time we do something, it's the first time, in technique as well as in music. And trying to use, maybe that's one thing that I would take away, even if it's repertoire with a fixed form. If I approach it as a story every time, then I can vary it. I can make this part more important or that part, or I can add an extra bit, or I can flourish here. So I think there is a good connection here. Thank you. I'd love to hear more at some point later about your experiences with these epic musicians. Elisabeth and then Aurore.
Yes, I think it is a very important point indeed, that whenever we perform, we never try to do this, to repeat something we have already done. But in order to achieve this, now as a singer, I speak from experience of very many Aufnahmeprüfungen. We hear Tona Mia Vagajar from the same singer, the same variations, because early music, and this is a very important point, because early music must not be, this is our strength still, that we are not performing the Messiah as everybody else, but that we have by knowing, but knowledge is an important thing, by knowing we are able to produce something new, a new view on something, a new output of something, and be creative while doing. And so this is a big hope I have, that young people like the ones here present are interested in finding their own ideas. And we try, at least I try, to give them their own, their craftsmanship, so that they can develop their own stories of what is there.
Thank you. That's so important. Aurore and then Marc.
Yeah, I'm never sure if it's going to be redundant, but it makes me really think about the fact that I feel in order to tell a story, whether it's a story that's been told for like 1,000 years, it really needs to be made your own. And we were talking about the fact that sometimes with medieval music, it's like notation and everything is so complicated to just understand what's on the paper. And at some point, to tell the story, the paper is just an envelope. We need to get away from it. And once we internalize it, then it doesn't matter really what story it was. It's not the same. It is the same, but it's not the same story anymore, because and then yeah, you can sing the same story for like 200s of time. It's totally going to be different, but it's really has to do with the artist's way. And it's also something that we talked about in Ireland a few years ago about traditional music of Ireland, and how maybe in earlier times, like 100 years ago, like the traditional musician has its own way of playing the same tune. And lately there has been more and more sessions, and we all learned exactly the same way to do it. And it's a great way to have the community come together. But of course, the authenticity of the story is lost. Yeah.
You actually, you cue into a bit of what Albert Lord says in his book about it's the advent of the written culture that that fixes something and stopped the individualization of the performance. Everybody can tell a story. We all know the same story, but we'll all tell it differently unless we've memorized it from one source. So yeah, I would absolutely continue to encourage you to work with this point. That's fantastic. Sorry, Marc?
Yeah, I was listening. I kind of forgot what I wanted to say, but I could maybe return. I mean, Aurore was there when last year we did the Cantigas de Santa Maria.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you about now. It could.
I'm reading the room. You're commanding your audience. So so what happened there? Aurore was there. She did a very, very compelling interpretation of a Cantiga de Santa Maria that really I felt was very touching. And my problem with the I've since the medieval market days, I've never touched the Cantigas de Santa Maria again, yeah? Because I felt there is a problem. I felt there was a problem with it, and it came with the edition that we have that provides a seemingly holistic text. I mean, not only text, but also musical text with a clear rhythm, with a clear rhythmical structure. And what happens, what I feel happens is when people do Cantigas de Santa Maria, that they are looking at that they're reading through the edition, they are looking at a good, interesting melody with an interesting rhythm. And the first things that happen is the rhythm is internalized and then maybe enhanced with percussion, and it becomes the thing. And once you start doing more strophes, you know, some of these cantigas have many, many strophes, you start cutting strophes because it becomes too long. It becomes a bit boring. What do we do with the second strophe? Then arrangements come into place. I'll come in the second strophe. You drop out. Then I'll do a second voice here. Then we'll have an instrumental interlude. So an arrangement takes over. And the result can be an interesting performance, but you don't hear a story. Yeah, you hear that cantiga made very interestingly somehow, but I believe as soon as fixed arrangements come into play, I feel that people are actually a bit at a loss with the style or with what they are performing, because they are trying to pour something else onto it, like ketchup is being put on top of the piece to make it interesting, to keep it interesting, and you spice it in different ways to keep it interesting. But actually the storytelling element would keep it all together if that would just happen. So in order not to fall into that trap, I banned that edition. And the first thing I did was scan the entire translation of the entire Cantigas in Santa Maria. And the first step I wanted my students to do was pick an interesting title. They all have titles, and descriptive titles. Find a story that you find interesting. So just from the translation, just to read the stories, not to read the original lyrics, not look at the music. As soon as you've got a good story that you would like to internalize, then it doesn't matter what melody it has. It'll be good. You're doing that. Yeah. Of course, there are some melodies that, you know, help you on the way, and that's okay. But I felt that as soon as someone is telling the story, the melody, the actual melody, is a bit of a secondary importance. It'll be nice in the end. It'll be enticing. And the same goes for the instrumentalists, that they should then also follow the story, follow the melody, first sing the melody. So next step was then to look at the original text, the actual text, understand the structure and the language and all that. And then the next step, put the melody on top without any musical rhythm that might come with it from the source, because that's also ambiguous. And I felt that as soon as we have musical rhythms in medieval music for monophony, I find it even a bit problematic, because the first attention goes into understanding the rhythmical notation and trying to put that forward. But I think a lot of that is a descriptive notation, not a prescriptive notation, especially with monophony. It's describing a mode of performance rather than prescribing exactly what you should do. So I wanted then, as a next step, for the modality of the music, so the modality of the melody, to inform the storytelling, and only as a last step take into account what rhythmical cues we find in the notation itself. And that's the final peppering also on top, and not the one that we should hear the first when we hear the piece. And I felt what came out of it were really well told stories. And then we had to cut strophes because the program would become too long, because everybody in the end wanted to do all the strophes, and they should have, but we didn't have enough time. So we then had to cut for other reasons, not because it was getting boring and we needed to do something different with it. So I felt it really worked, but it took a long time and much more effort, of course. It's the long way around, but there are no shortcuts to a good story, I guess.
But and I was at the concert and I was blown away, which was kind of the catalyst actually for this topic, was trying to you putting the priorities on its head and not having the students pick the pieces based on the prettiest melody, the most captivating rhythm, something that was catchy, actually made it much more approachable to the audience, because after you've sung something 24 times, as often is the case with cantigas, then it's no longer as captivating. But if you're invested in the story, then the music is a beautiful transmitter. It's the transport vehicle for the story, and then they interact, and then the audience gives you what you need to continue your performance. So I thought, setting that, that was the genius moment for me, was when you said pick the pieces based on the stories, not based on the music. And I thought, yeah, that's not the way we usually do things, because we're thinking in terms of recordings. What's going to sound good on a 60-minute CD? The catchiest, most beautiful tunes. But this is very, very good. And I will let the floor, I think maybe Isaac wanted to say something, and then Tabea.
I wanted just to thank Marc for his words right now, because it's exactly the case, not only with that kind of repertoire, but also with analogous repertoires. I've been experimenting for a long time with especially with my brother, on Spanish romances. And some of those romances are extremely long. By the way, many of them have no music, so we have to make up our own music, which is also something very good to do. And now connected with the thing that Kelly was saying about the recordings, and even before the recordings, the idea of the concert, where the story maybe is never the main thing. Haven't we gone through several centuries of going more and more for the idea of the piece of music? Yeah, that at the beginning was the dressing of a story, or the dressing of a liturgy, and now we perform the mass just as part of a concert. Then the whole rite is lost, or the whole the place in life, the biotope of the music is not there. So we have many possibilities, let's say, in the past, in which music was involved with many other things, and the more we have gone to the concert, the more only a part of the music survives, and a lot of it has to be cut, like the strophes of these cantigas.
Thank you. It's really good to bring this into other repertoires as well. True. Tabea?
My reaction is actually sort of a bit outdated now, because it was to the the question you raised before, Kelly, about the learning processes and what it needs, like what teaching has to do with it all. And I don't know if anybody else has made the experience, but I find that the courage it takes to tell your own story can sometimes tend to come a bit late in your musical training. At least if you're like me, a like sort of classically trained musician. And something that I like to experiment with now, when I'm currently working with a group of kids, they're like aged 8 to 13, and we're doing Renaissance counterpoint and motets and Renaissance repertory together. So what we like to experiment with is imagining the music first. So this whole concept of, well, what the historical writers would maybe call musica humana, what the modern music pedagogists would call audiation. So like you create your story inside first, or you have some elements of your story ready inside before you actually speak it out and interact and get reactions. And I mean, to us, this is something we always do, because we never just play the music that is written there, but there's this whole world that's happening inside. But yeah, in my experience to the kids, it's quite revealing that yeah, you have all these thoughts inside, and some things come out as a story, but this understanding or listening to your own thoughts first is such an essential point. Yeah.
Do you think that it's a little bit more direct with children than with adults? Do they have a clearer connection to their imagination and to to imagining the music before they go in, or is it also a learned process for them? Or you're doing this with this Oikantemos project?
Yeah,
yes?
exactly. So I in the Oikantemos project, which is a mixed setting with young professionals, like students of the Schola Cantorum and kids, I would say it's a bit of the same, but certainly from different perspectives, because the kids are a bit sort of fearless, if you know what I'm saying. Like they just go for it, even though they are not trained in singing. They just sing, and maybe for people who have performed real music before, as to say pre-existing music, they maybe compare their own story to the stories that they have heard before, and it's this what I don't know who said it, this different roles of who is a performer and who is a composer and so on, like that we separate these roles so much is maybe not so strong in the kids, so they can be everything at all. Yeah,
I think kids just also live in this realm of storytelling and imagination. There's so much in that I just have, I mean, from my experience, it feels like it's a smaller step for them. But I'm sorry, Elizabeth has been wanting to say something.
Yes, first of all, I wanted to ask Marc, how many strophes was the longest thing you dared to perform in a concert? Because I mean, with German Baroque song, you also have 20 something strophes, and we usually cut them and take the most interesting ones or the most understandable ones. And then the second is that Tabea voiced a very important word, courage. Yes, young people have to have courage to choose their pieces and the courage to give their own interpretation in that. That is very, very good. And as for the choice of pieces, I have to say that indeed, my first Schubert song, which I chose, was not because I liked the melody or anything, but I liked the story. I was 18 or 17 and I sang Schubert's Zwerg. I mean, this is, yeah, it's a very funny thing, but that is because I was always thrilled by stories. But so, Marc, what do you, how courageous were you to do that?
Okay, I think there are others who are more courageous than me. I'm just thinking of Marc Moyon's performances with Pierre Ramon of Machot, lays, full lays, half an hour with 30 strophes and stuff like that, you know, that so work, you know, it totally works. I myself, I mean, I'm not a singer, so I do sing occasionally, accompanying myself. If the melody is not too complicated. Like an Oswald song, we did Durch Abenteuer Tal und Berg with 14 strophes. I believe that's 10 minutes or so, something like that, 10, 11, 12 minutes. Or Wer das Elend bauen will, Tabea, you were there. I don't know, we did also like 14 strophes, so they are shorter strophes. There's a long Night Art song, very long melody, very complicated, almost 2 octaves. I didn't do that, I gave that to a singer. And we did, I think, 11 strophes of that, and that's in itself, that's 12, 13 minutes. And my experience with that sort of thing is, of course, you need to believe in it. There's the courage thing coming in. You need not to be told, do 12 strophes, but it needs to be so internalized, appropriated. We talked about this, make it your own. You know, this is my main thing also with singers that I have in my ensemble. They need to make these songs their own. And when that works, once that works and they believe in it and the courage is there to actually put that on, then I feel for the audience there is I feel there's a threshold over which you need to get. So after a few strophes, it becomes harder. And after maybe 3 strophes, 4 strophes, you could say, it could end now. Maybe the audience could also say, yeah, I know the melody now. Now it could maybe, but if you dare to go a bit more, then I feel you're over the threshold, and then you can go on forever. Forever, like so. I can just briefly tell of maybe an anecdote from when I was studying. We had a Ukrainian singer, Kopsar, Taras Kompanishenko, I think was his name, who was invited by Nicoletta Gossen to give a workshop on storytelling singing back then. And he would put on performances for us. And of course, we don't understand a word of old Ukrainian songs. He would briefly summarize the story, then close his eyes, play his kopsa, and sing by heart 20 minutes, 25 minutes of the same thing. Everybody, the same thing happened. After a few minutes, you kind of think, okay, I get the melody now. And then you kind of sink, you get over the threshold and you sink into this, it's almost a meditative situation where and I think that then it works, really. Then it works when it's, to me, more painful for it to end than to go on. So it's a state where I am satisfied or I'm filled with what's coming. And it is almost painful when they do the final chord and stop. It's like, I need to go out of this situation again. I need to come back. And I feel that's the moment where you can go on and go on and go on. And you actually want it to go on, even if you don't understand the words. Then to me, it works.
This is when the performer and the audience are in flow together. That's what we're trying to achieve. That's an excellent point. Thanks, Katarina, and then Aurore.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something that would go a little bit back, but it's always turning around the same subject. We did say several times how it is important that we always find something new and fresh that we can tell through the pieces of music and poetry that have been existing for centuries. But I think that sometimes in our society, which is obsessed with this constant need for originality, we are always pushed everywhere to be new, original, to change everything. And I always say the same story. If we asked a master of no theater to change every year something in order to please the Ministry of Culture who will subsidize him, what would he have of these old venerable traditions? So I think when we say we need to give something new, I think we shouldn't fall in the trap of always having to, at any price, invent something. Saying something new is just going into ourselves. That's what I try to do, either through teaching or through performing. Also, like you mentioned it some days ago, Kelly, Judith, the epic poem from Renaissance Croatia, one whole same piece for an hour. I always feel, and I tell that to students when we work, how could you feel? What about this story could relate to you? What could be your own thoughts that you could recognize in this? And I think in order to do that successfully and to be a successful storyteller, I think we need to have the humility to show our frailty, that we are fragile, and to show our emotions, not to pretend having emotions and be expressive, but just accept that we are fragile and that we could share that with the others. And I think that's the moment of truth that can happen.
That's an excellent point. And when we get into the question of authenticity, it's the personal authenticity, yes, and not the historical. We're coming close to an end, but I want to check and see if Aurore still wants to speak, and then Anton, and then Isaac.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I so agree with everything that's just been said by both Marc and Katarina. It's amazing, and it just I realized there is really different ways to feel and to experience the storytelling. And we were talking about courage, and yes, courage is a great. I mean, it needs courage to go on stage, and but at some point, I realized when the humility of transmitting a story comes in, then it's not enough. It's not anymore about like I'm afraid people are going to judge me because I'm the one telling the story. It's just like, guys, I heard such a great story and I love it and I really want to share it with you. And then it's about sharing, and it's not anymore about being afraid of being the one who is going to tell it, because I'm not responsible for the story. I didn't write it down. I'm just transmitting it. And that's a really amazing thing. And it just, and there is another point about connecting, and there is so many ways to connect with the audience. I realized, so if I think of traditional French songs that I love, then I'm so, and I talk to people who understand the language, then people are so fascinated by what's going to happen that we would never ever think of cutting a strophe, because we really want to know what's going to happen. And if we cut it, then the story is not finished, or something is missing. So we would never do that. But at the same time, when the people who is telling or singing or whatever he's doing or playing is so into it, and I've seen that with traditional musicians, indeed, they can close their eyes and the eye connection with the audience is lost, but the connection is so here. And Marc was telling about it, and like because it's so transcendental, and whatever is happening inside the storyteller's head with his eyes closed or just transmitted in the whole room, and it's sometimes even more powerful. Yeah. And then, yeah, humility comes in, but also I feel like at some point the fear of telling is just vanishing.
Thank you. This is such an important point. It's so great to hear this. And I see that Suzanne mentioned, has reacted to you also very strongly in the chat. No ego, just love for the story. So yeah, I think we're there with you. Before I get to Anton and then Isaac, I would like to just say that I know that Katarina had a deadline and that she will be leaving us now. And so I would love to, we're just going to spend another, I think, 5 minutes, but I'd just like to say thank you so much for your really important inputs here. It was a fantastic discussion.
Thank you, Kelly, for inviting me, and thanks everybody for this extremely enriching and alive conversation. And I'm very sorry I will have to run now. Thanks
so much. And we're close to the end anyway. So, but before I pass on, I would just also, I think it's been such a lovely round, and I'm glad that we've heard more than one person speak. There have been fantastic inputs. So, Anton?
I actually was not raising my hand. I was just applauding to what Katarina was saying. And of course, what Marc was saying, and I'm also applauding to you, Kelly, how you led through this wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
It's the blind leading the blind, I think, but that's part of the storytelling. Thank you very much. And now, just to close, I'd like to give the floor to Isaac, especially to give us an idea of what the next Quodlibet will be in December, a super fascinating topic.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marc and Katarina, who also already disconnected. But that was fascinating. And as I was thinking about how to connect this thing with what is coming in the upcoming Quodlibet. The idea that comes to my mind is, in a way, there are things that early music has to offer that do not fit in the traditional form of the concert, of the recording, or even in the traditional form of the conservatory, even. Yeah, these things of rituals, these things, I was thinking when Marc was talking about all these strophes, I was thinking a little bit about, once I was, a couple times I have done this, like performing the whole Tenebre service during the Holy Week, one psalm, another psalm, another psalm, another psalm. At some point you get into this, yeah? So that is not something that fits, nothing against concerts, nothing against recordings, nothing against the Brandenburg Concerto that works perfectly in those media, no, in that yeah. But there are more things, and there are things that can go beyond these sort of ideas. So one of these things, one of these topics, and something that we're going to be talking about during the next Quodlibet is three words: early music pedagogy. 3 words that can be read in 2 ways: early music pedagogy or early music pedagogy. So how are we teaching early music today? How was early music taught in the past? And the dialectics that we can establish between these 2 things, which is something that is it's a hot topic these days, of course, everywhere, and there's a lot of people here also interested in this. So I will just post the link of a conference that is happening in the beginning of December. That is the link in the chat. It's called Early Music Pedagogy Then and Now, from Classical Antiquity to the Renaissance. Yeah? The program is quite interesting. This is happening in Brescia. It's organized by the Centro Studi Opera Omnia Luigi Boccherini from Lucca, and the Istituto Italiano di Musica Antica and Palma Chorales Research Group. These are also good friends of mine. I know them quite well, and I'm going to be there also. The interesting thing of that, the thing that connects that thing and our Quodlibet, is that we are going to invite one of the keynote speakers of this event to come to our next Quodlibet, which we can already say, I think it's going to stay like that, 15th December, so 1 month from now, exactly same day. It's also Thursday. It is also going to be at 6, like today. We are going to have Barnabé Janan, who in the symposium in Brescia, and also for us in the Quodlibet, is going to talk about how to build an early music department, reflections on a didactic challenge. We will have also the opportunity to have maybe a couple more participants of the symposium to also engage in conversation, and as always, everyone is welcome to discuss their own ideas, or just to bring any sort of contributions to this topic, which, as I was saying, I think it is very much one of the things right now in early music, and that's what I think I wanted to say about this.
Thank you so much. We're really looking forward to it. It will give us a lot to think about, absolutely. So with that, then, and if there's no final urgent comments, then I'll close the session, and thank you especially to Marc Lewon, who is still here, and to everyone who participated. It was a great session. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
It's great.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.